What's quite interesting, actually, though, is that mentioned Shane Black's script being quite funny. And lots of other Shane Black's films have been incredibly funny, although apparently a lot of the humour in that isn't actually his. That was punched up by Jeffrey Boehm, who is the person who wrote the screenplay for the next entry. So, Scott, did that hold up as well as the first one?
Well, we're talking, of course, about Lethal Weapon 2, which Mel Gibson's detective Martin Riggs and Danny Glover's detective Roger Murtaugh return 2 years later in order to do what was fashionable for sequels at the time, that being more or less the same thing again, but cranked up a bit. And here the duo stumble into a plot involving the smuggling of Krugerrands, going all the way up to South African Consul General Arjen Rood, played by Joss Ackland, and his attack dog, security agent Pieter Vorsted, Derek O'Connor. Again, both strong South African presences played by an Englishman and an Irishman, if I remember correctly. But doing the accent because it's funny. Warned off the case, diplomatic immunity, don't you know, and assigned babysitting duties for Joe Pesky's federally protected witness, Leo Getz, most famous, of course, for his snappy catchphrase, "Anything you desire, Leo acquires." I think that was it. I may remember that wrong. Anyway, what I'm trying to get at is that the lads cannot stop sniffing around the case with Leo in tow, leading to, well, the sort of conflicts, chases and quips that you'd expect from a sequel to Lethal Weapon. And it is a solid sequel and very enjoyable on its own terms. It is not as good as the original for all of the decidedly unoriginal reasons, most of them common to any film series that studios have decided should become a franchise. The character developments of Shane Black's unfilmed script for the project is largely jettisoned in favour of keeping Riggs and Murtaugh much the same, but with some of the rougher edges filed off for a more mass market appeal. But there's more than enough chemistry between Gibson and Glover for that not to be too big of an issue. Its primary problem is a need to be seen to turn up the dials a bit from the original with mixed success. The Afrikaner villains are luxuriously hateful, but the perceived need to tie into Riggs's past is a bridge too far in a series that was never, admittedly, all that high on the believability index. But coupled with the killing off of half of the duo's barely mentioned detective colleagues and the short-shrifted love interest Patsy Kensit also being killed, then maybe this envelope cannot quite cope with this degree of pushing. And I mean, certainly there's much worse cases of sequelitis. Indeed, we'll get to them. And this has maintained much of the charm, chemistry and kinetics of the first film, so it is still a pretty enjoyable watch. Returning to your question, I can't remember if this hell holds up quite as well as it did back in the day. I can't remember the first time I watched Lethal Weapon 2. I don't actually recall much of Lethal Weapon 2 at all, to be honest, apart, of course, from diplomatic immunity, which has been repeated
everybody remembers, isn't it?
Yes.
Diplomatic immunity.
And I was pleasantly surprised, I think, when I was going back to this. It is not as good as Lethal Weapon 1, but it's not a massive step down, which I was not expecting, to be honest. This actually maintains an awful lot of the charm, and to be fair, a lot of the flaws of the first film. It's still a bit casual in its approach to racism, but it's a bit more excusable in this because of the characters who are being racist. It makes a bit more sense. And it's an enjoyable watch. I was even less annoyed by Leo Getz as I thought I might have been. I seem to remember the worst parts of him. Anytime he's on screen, I actually quite like Joe Pesci because, well, he's Joe Pesci. How could you not like him? So it is pretty good. I don't have any particular qualms that I've not already mentioned there. It is not quite on a par with Lethal Weapon 2, but I've seen much, much worse drop-offs in quality between the 1 and the 2 of any kind of sequel film. So yes, it is still worthy of a place in your collection.
Yeah, it's a really solid sequel. And I like Joe Pesci a lot, and I think it's the reason I don't find that character as annoying as I ought to, but it's the films we'll come to where it begins to become a bit of a problem for me, certainly on these rewatches. Yeah, Lethal Weapon is really solid. It's got good villains in this.
That's a strong point of it. Yeah,
they're
all really hateful.
Horrible character. And again, the racism in this makes sense because it is about the apartheid regime in South Africa, sort of vaguely. By proxy.
To a degree, yes.
But you're black. It is one of those films, though, and it's not uncommon in the genre, but it does not pay to think about it. Don't think about it. It will not serve you well. Riggs and Rika are assaulted by not one, but 2 helicopter gunships, destroy his trailer, and then afterwards, no police, no hospitals, just casually back to Rika's flat. Okay. And then like the whole film actually is from like, basically the opening scene is stupid. It makes no sense. They're chasing the guy in the red BMW, the guy who plays Wade Boggs in Shawshank Redemption. I forget his name. And he's got a boot full of Krugerrands. Why? It doesn't make any sense. It's because they had to find some way to get them interested in South Africans.
Yes.
It doesn't make it, especially when later on they have a container full of American dollars that's getting shipped back to South Africa. It's like, it didn't make any sense. Why is that there? It's really does. So yeah, don't think about it. And it's a really solid 1980s action film. A lot of fun. I mean, as is kind of common for these things, the women get pretty short shrift.
Yeah.
These things do tend to be sausage fests. Patsy Kensit, who's adequate. And I mean, I don't mean that necessarily to criticise her. She's not given a lot to do.
Yeah.
She's there to be the pretty girl that gets fridged for Riggs to go really mad and pull down a house with a pickup truck, which, again, don't think about it.
Yeah. What are you talking about? This house is on stilts. Yes.
It's, but yeah, it's fun anyway, even if you don't want to also think about the kind of extrajudicial killing that Riggs is doing of people. People he doesn't necessarily know are bad guys, but they're in the right place at the right time, so we'll just shoot them. Okay.
Yeah.
One amazing thing that feels quite different now, given that this is about this criminal white supremacist who has enriched himself through political office. When they're in the shipping container at the end, and Riggs says, it's like they won the Donald Trump lotto. I thought that was quite amusing. But yeah, I think, man, I give away how I feel about the next two films, but certainly the first two, really solid, still hold up, and are things I would definitely recommend.
Yeah. So perhaps a bit of foreshadowing, but